welcome to the premiere episode of Why We Podcast. My name is Vik Rajan. I will be your host. I am also the co-founder of Video Socials and PhoneBlogger.net. We are marketing services for lawyers and for accountants and for coaches and consultants. And on this podcast, those folks share why and how their podcast helps really three populations. So typically they have let's say a video interview podcast. So they're interviewing a guest. So we're going to learn from them of how their show, their podcast or video show benefits their guest, benefits their audience, which very often coincides with their type of clientele, but not necessarily. And of course, how does the show help themselves? It could be for their private practice. It could be for some other endeavor that they are looking to achieve. You can catch this podcast and this video live stream every Friday at noon Eastern. You can go to videosocial.net/watchWWP for Why We Podcast. And you can catch it on LinkedIn Live, Facebook Live, as well as YouTube. And then you'll be able to soon subscribe. But if you're listening to this on Apple Podcast or Stitcher or Spotify or Google Podcasts, we hope you already do subscribe so you'll be alerted to our weekly program. Today we have Daniel Wiig, who's going to be talking to us about his podcast that he does with the Professional Association of the New York County Lawyers Association. Dan, there are competing pronunciations of the show. So is it Amicus or is it Amicus? I think it's Amicus. So
it's whatever you want it to be.
It's kind of like the law. Yes. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do professionally, how you're involved with NYCLA, how did this show get started?
Sure. So by day,
Yes.
I am Associate General Counsel for the City University of New York. I have been there for a short period of time, only about 6 months.
Yeah, CUNY.
CUNY, right. Otherwise known as CUNY. Thank you. So I've been involved with the New York County Lawyers Association for a very, very long time. I served on a number of different roles, including chair of the Young Lawyers section. I sat on the board. I sat on the foundation board. I sat on the executive committee. I chaired membership. It's, I should be paid for all that stuff. And then what it's sort of very, either you find it funny or you find it, I was speaking with some of the staff members, whom I consider good friends at NYCLA, the summer of 20, and it was like, why don't we do a podcast? It literally was like this sort of just came out of nowhere, and then we said, sure, why not? Let's do it. There were some delays because of life gets in the way, stuff, right? And here we are.
And what was the original intent? Like, how did that come up in conversation? That's not a typical conversation. How did that even come?
I think the intent was just to, it took on a lot of different forms. I think initially the idea was that it was strictly for NYCLA's membership, which are attorneys, and right. to bring to them various, issues or facets of the legal profession that they would find useful and beneficial in their practice, but bringing it in a format that's not a CLE or not formal, but just what eventually we've named the podcast, which is a candid conversation. So as you and I are doing right now, just a comfortable and casual conversation between friends about whatever the topic might be. And what we've done, I'm sure you'll get into this in your questioning, and we've tried to run the gamut of different topics that we could present to our listeners, which has since grown, because it's not just, you don't have to be a NYCLA member to listen to the podcast. We are in fact on Apple and Spotify and all the platforms that are out there. So anyone across the country. And I understand we get a lot of downloads in London. Don't ask me why London, but that's what I'm told, from Apple, I think. That's where we are.
Global. You're a global podcast.
Apparently so.
That's awesome. So how many episodes have you done so far?
So we've dropped 15 or 16 in 2021.
Okay.
I've recorded
dropped as in like the street lingo of publishing.
I'm sorry. So that's the lingo of drop. So it's sort of out there in the world. I've recorded 2 so far for 22, which will be dropped the end of this month and early next month.
Okay, cool. So you're about 16 to 18 episodes in, depending on how you count.
Right.
So who are some of your guests? So like, what kind of guests? If you name names,
Yeah,
like what kind of...
yeah. I'll make them happy.
Yeah, right.
I'll name names. So, like as I mentioned before, we sort of run the gamut.
Right.
We've had folks on who've addressed networking,
Sure.
sort of how to network properly. That was Dina Bakowitz, also known as Fireball. She's all over social media. For those of you
Yeah,
listening,
sure.
may know of her. We've had someone talk about the importance of soft skills in your practice. Not so much the hard skills of knowing everything there is to know about, say, IP law, but just how to interact with people, how to deal with customers. We've had some what I've called hard hitting issues. We had someone address gun control and gun regulations in here in the U.S. We had a mother and daughter matrimonial law team. Perhaps one of the only mother-daughter law firms that we know of, at least here in New York City,
Sure.
who talked about their very fascinating career trajectory.
And really like about like how it is they run the firm together, you mean? So
how they run the firm together.
Family dynamics within a law firm.
The family dynamics. They've had what we would call celebrity clients, and sort of how they did their rainmaking and developed their reputation. We had the administrative judge for the New York City civil courts talk about changes he put into place as a result of COVID, but would sort of work logically and sort of keeping them in place even after when we eventually get past the COVID world.
Sure.
Our first guest was Judge Stewart. He's a magistrate judge in the Southern District of New York, former NICLA president, and he spoke about how he sang and danced for former Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg at a musical number that they performed at the New York City Bar Association. So
literally song and dance. Okay, not
literally song and dance. Yes,
not just figurative of what you may have to do. So, yeah. Oh, that's kind of fun. That's a fun thing. So why do they come on? And what's your invitation like for them to come on? Like, how do they benefit? And what is that premise like? Because I know it's candid conversations, but what does that mean?
Yeah, I think it varies. I think there are some folks who, and what I'm about to say doesn't come across, anything other than just
candid.
Thank you. They get to, if they have something to sell, they sort of get to promote it. So if you're a networking coach, and I know you're a coach of sorts as well, they they can showcase what they can do for their clients.
Sure.
In some cases, it's sort of, maybe in Judge Canataro's case, Judge Canataro was the chief administrative judge for the civil courts. He now sits on the New York Court of Appeals to talk about what he's done, so the bar can understand, sort of the improvements that he made in the processes in civil court. And in some cases, we had the current president of NICLA come on, talk about what he envisions a bar association can be in the 21st century. So
he's got something to sell, his vision for the organization.
He's got something to sell. And then I think with terms of like I mentioned, the gun control, or we had Judge Rakoff from the Southern District come on to talk about his book, Why the Innocent Plead Guilty. Some things he feels very passionate about that are the shortcomings of our criminal justice system.
Sure.
They get to sort of share their, preach their gospel, if you would.
Sure, right. And it's the advocacy, it's the cause.
Yeah.
So it's selling the righting of the wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, at least from their perspective. That's cool. That's really neat. So have you heard of any actual benefits when they come on? Do they share the show? Have they been able to engage with listeners? Have you heard of any kind of, lack of a better phrase, success stories when guests have come on and they've benefited tangibly in some way? Has anyone shared it with you?
People have told me that they've been people have reached out to the guests. I heard you on the show.
Oh, good.
I learned something. I appreciated something. So yeah, it does get out. And many of our guests have sort of, promoted, the episodes on their own social media or their firm websites, or, wherever they communicate with the public.
Yeah, guests tend to be, like delighted, unless it's like a gotcha investigatory, but otherwise it's not like you're showing. There's no gotcha there. So from that aspect, it's good to hear that that your audience is reaching out to your guests, because that's a nice, you're the go-between, you're the bridge in that way. So from that aspect, it's helpful to kind of hear. When we come back, I'm going to do a quick commercial break. I'd love to hear a little bit of how has your show benefited some viewers and listeners. If you've heard, or it's really just you don't do video, right?
No, it's just audio.
Yeah. So have you? When we come back, I'd love to hear if you heard of any kind of engagement or reviews or feedback from anyone listening from the show. And then how has the show benefited maybe you personally, but of course, NYCLA as an organization? Well, let's take a quick 1 minute break, and then we will come back.
Do you want your own podcast like this one? My team will do all the grunt work for you. Just show up, smile, and enjoy talking to your potential clients and referral relationships. Go to videosocials.net/govip to watch our 9-minute webinar for all the details. Are you a busy lawyer, coach, consultant like me? You should have a podcast done for you to get you more clients, impress your colleagues, and it becomes your perpetual referrals flywheel. We find you the right guests. We schedule your guests, handle all the podcast tech, get you into Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and more. Done for you. Go to videosocials.net/govip to watch our 9-minute webinar for all the details. Now back to the show.
And we are back, hey Dan.
We're back.
We're back. So as I kind of previewed before the break, so how does this show benefit your audience? It's not exclusively NYCLA members, right, who are pretty exclusively attorneys, but of course, since you are global, it can go even beyond. Yeah, it's great. And from that aspect, it can go even beyond those in the legal profession. Have you heard anything from listeners of engaging with the show?
Yes.
How are they benefited?
There was one person who connected with me on LinkedIn,
mm-hmm,
and he listened to the show that we did about gun control. And
okay,
to give you a little context of it, the guest was Judge Peggy Finnerty. She's a retired New York City criminal judge. She's a partner in a law firm in New York City. And she had written a report along with others, which was an analysis, of various gun control regulations throughout the country. And we wanted to do a show that took the politics out of the issue and I hate to say this, and I hope I don't sound cold by saying this, but the emotion that obviously, sure, because it's an emotionally driven, for obvious reasons. I mean, the carnage that we've seen.
Yeah.
And she just presented factually, what are the regulations that are in place? What are the loopholes that, what are the topics that are not covered? How has the Supreme Court interpreted the Second Amendment? And I had someone reach out to me who said they never paid attention to this issue before. They heard the noise, the politicians, the emotion, the horror of some of these stories that we've experienced over the past year. But the way it was presented in such a clear, without emotion, without
that objectivity,
the objectivity, that this person really had a good grasp of this issue. And what's it, what are the regulation? What's it sort of really about? And it gave them an understanding that they couldn't get anywhere else, because the other talks, the other shows were filtered through a lens,
some bias.
So that to me was, I thought that achieved our goal. We wanted to educate people. No agenda. We weren't pushing legislation for gun control.
Sure.
We weren't saying there weren't enough or there's too much. It was just, this is what's out there. You make the decision yourself. So I think that's one example of how, it benefited a listener.
That's a great example. In terms of the original intent, that when this idea came up in conversation of NYCLA leadership, do you feel it's achieving that original goal? Like going back to how we even started the conversation, was there something specific that you think the organization wanted to achieve? And it could be really bringing out these kinds of important legislative type discussions and policy discussions. Do you feel, and how do you feel the show has helped kind of further NYCLA's goals in that sense?
Well, so I think that the thing with the show is there's no agenda.
Sure.
And I don't say that to insult any other show, but we're not selling anything. maybe to some extent, we're not even selling nightclub membership. It's just a service of whatever the topic is.
Sure.
How to network, how to build a book of business.
Yeah.
Let's give you the facts about gun control. Let's talk about it. I recorded an episode, hasn't been dropped yet, on plea bargaining.
Yeah.
Why there are so many defects with plea bargaining, innocent people pleading guilty because they don't think they're getting a fair shot, because they don't trust the justice system, because television just screws you up because you think everyone's corrupt or something that's just not true.
Right.
So I think to get that out and to get that sort of, we're not selling you anything. We have no agenda. We just want to give you whatever we can give you to help
Sure.
you in your career, help you understand the legal issue. Then
Yeah.
I think we've achieved our goal.
And I think with that, like under that auspices, to put it that way, it kind of furthers the organization for more people to get to know a nightclub, and it's
Right.
obviously being very New York City centric,
Right.
Can gain that national, if not international, recognition and prominence. For yourself, Dan, working with CUNY, you're not selling anything, you're not in private practice, but there's still your personal brand and your career development and professionalism. Has the show helped you at all?
It's only, I would say that it's helped me that I've had some very interesting and fun conversations with people.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
then you invited me here, so that helped me.
There you go.
So I think that's where I see that I've received the benefit,
Yeah.
that I've had these interesting conversations. And to the extent, obviously, I go back to the gun control show. Peggy Finnerty gets all the credit because it was her brain that put everything together. But to the sense that I'm the guy that was leading the conversation, because my job as host, if I contributed to having that person understand it better, then I got something out of that.
Which is a nice segue. I didn't include in any of the prep questions, so don't feel any gotcha here. But
there were prep questions?
Yeah, there were prep questions, right? Was there talking about prep? Is there any kind of prep that you did for that particular episode or for other episodes? What kind of, do you have to do any kind of a prep, or because your guest is such a thought leader and a subject matter expert, she's able to kind of run with it because this is what she does for a living?
Yeah.
How do you prepare and how do you structure your show?
Right. So I like the shows to be conversational.
Okay.
As we're doing right now, not sort of, I've listened to podcasts where it's very robotic almost,
There's a
there's a checklist. And so I do discuss with the guests what we're going to talk about, a very, very loose agenda. So there's an order, there's a flow of it, but anything can sort of happen because it's like, again, I had one compliment early on where someone said they thought the podcast, they felt like they were a fly on the wall listening to two friends have a conversation.
Right.
So, and I think, so it is structured, but it's structured in a sort of a loose sense that gives us enough freedom to sort of diverge if something comes up. And I didn't even think about that. So
yeah,
we do plan, but it's sort of loose. Something like gun control, something like plea bargaining, which is so specific.
Right.
You need a little bit more than, say, if we're going to have a free flowing conversation on how to make rain.
Right. So you had a little bit more specificity with your questions. Is that what you mean?
More specificity. So for example, again, I keep using the gun control one. I didn't realize I was going to use that so much, but there was the topic of the Second Amendment, how the Supreme Court has interpreted the Second Amendment. What are some of the various types of laws out there, red flag laws and waiting periods and things like that. So there is a little bit more structure than, say, maybe something else that's more, less free. Like if I'm interviewing someone about their practice, because they're, again, I mentioned the mother and daughter firm.
Yeah.
That's maybe a little more free flowing.
Right. And you can pretty much take it where they want to go with it.
Right.
So that makes sense. What have you learned along the way? So you're at like episode 18, basically, even though maybe only 16 or so have been published. What do you now know at the 18th episode? Not that you wished you knew in the first, but that you now do know from, let's say, on the first couple, that looking back you didn't do, or you probably don't do now? Or is there a learning aspect to this where now 18 episodes in, you probably kind of got your rhythm? There's, you know what you're doing as a host, be it a very structured or prepared topic or not. You're going into this pretty confidently. So, talk to us about that learning.
So the thing that comes to mind when you ask that is that the very first one that I recorded, as you probably can imagine, it was a little nerve-wracking because I never did it before.
Yeah.
But the operative word there is we record them.
Okay.
So we've had instances where we had to stop because there was a baby crying or a dog barking. So the silly response to that is we can stop and just re-record, and the magic of editing, clears up all the grooves. Splice it out. So that's sort of. I mean, I think the other thing is, I think any host lets the guest do the talking. We're just, when you're a host now, when I'm a host, we just facilitate. Right. Sometimes you watch these TV shows and the hosts talk too much, and then the guests are like, "What are you doing?" So maybe that's the sort of the learning question that always the guest is the star. You're just a prop. That's what I tell them at night. I'm just a prop here. Everyone else is a star.
So you feel there's the logistics that you now know how to be quiet yourself or to help the guests stay in a relatively quiet and not do as much editing. Right. But from the get-go, it's been a smooth sailing. So that's a good thing. Any kind of future plans of what else you're looking to do with the show? Is that do you guys discuss that at the organization, or is it too new? 18 episodes in.
I think what we're planning on doing this year is to have, and I'm not sure what the right word is, but we may have sort of umbrella shows. So one thing that we're looking to do is we're probably going to have a 3-part, and when I say 3-part, 3 months, because we drop an episode one a month, maybe 2 if we able to squeeze it in.
Thank you. That was a question that I should have asked you of how often you come out with the show. So it's about 1 or 2 times a month.
Yeah. Okay. So we're looking to do a series on careers.
Sure.
So we're going to have someone on. We're looking to have a conversation on how law firms and maybe legal departments of corporations are changing how we work because of COVID, meaning who's flexibility, working from home. Sure. There's a law firm that recently announced they're remote they're remote now. They're remote now in perpetuity. They're remote because it functions, it works. People can sit in their pajamas and it's fine. So we're hoping to do a show on that, and that's obviously career focused. We're also going to be interviewing another gentleman who talks about how you can use your experiences to transition to a new career. So someone who is a lawyer, doesn't want to be a lawyer. What did you learn as a lawyer that can bring you to whatever the new thing is you want to do? That's true. And then we're also going to be talking about promoting women in the workforce, in the legal profession, in law firms, and in other areas. So I think we're going to be doing some umbrella topics,
umbrella theme areas,
like over like maybe quarterly for the year.
Sure, that's kind of neat. That's a cool.
And we'll be dropping in, probably other types of specialty episodes now and then.
How did you decide the frequency? Did it start off monthly and then you started doing more shows than just once a month? I mean, it's like, how do you decide? Is it 1 or 2 times? I mean, that's
the amount of content. Yeah, I think most of the work is done in house. So Nykla's staff is doing it. They have other things to do.
Yeah.
So I think that's how it started, but once a month.
Okay.
But once in a while we get, for example, here in New York, recreational cannabis use was signed into law last spring by then Governor Cuomo. And so I wanted to get something out quickly about that. And I knew this young female attorney who is a thought leader in cannabis law, which is a evolving and new field. Right. We wanted to get that. We wanted to get that in because it was very timely to drop it right around that time. It was also timely, I think, to drop the idea of how the civil court system was changing its procedures and policies to address COVID, to get that out quickly because last spring we didn't think we'd be in the same shoes.
This COVID thing is going to wrap up soon, but we better get this show.
And here we are, almost a year later from that when we dropped that episode. So that's sort of we're flexible in the sense we recognize maybe there's things to drop.
So timeliness is a factor. Timeliness, urgency of the topic.
But it's also to answer, maybe to go back to your question about what did you learn.
Yeah.
One thing about podcasts, as you very well know, they're evergreen, and so there's a trick, I think, to how do you make it relevant to the time that you're dropping it,
Right.
but that it's still relevant, it's still green
Yeah.
2
Right.
years from now.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it's out there.
It's.
Yeah.
I think all types of content, from podcasts to video blogs to traditional written blogs and articles, case studies, white papers, all have to. There's that benefit of timeliness because we tend to, watch the news of breaking news. Everything's breaking news for that reason because it's timely. So anything that's urgent, we tend to, drop things to find out what just got dropped. But then there's the timelessness, as you mentioned, right? So there's that opposite of evergreen nature that we wanted to say evergreen. But then again, you lose the timely urgency of people really wanting to listen to it now because it's breaking news about COVID, let's say. But it's timeless because there are going to be topics of, let's say, working virtual that could have been relevant 2 years ago before all this COVID stuff, but really wasn't in the zeitgeist. And now it is. And forevermore, I think there is definitely that sea change where now working from home, having flexible virtual hours, all those kinds of things are probably to some extent here to stay, even if, as COVID dissipates, we're still grappling with this now changing because we're now all used to being virtual and people see the benefits more than the pitfalls as we get out of this. So yeah, it's a great point, Dan, that you have to kind of be with the trend and be with the timeliness, but then also you want the timelessness, the evergreen aspect. So that's a good juggle that you do.
Yeah.
That's cool. So where do you promote the show? So what happens? So it's on the NYCLA website. I know that.
Right.
Do you put it out there on LinkedIn? You mentioned earlier it's on the podcast platforms. Where are all the places people can hear and watch the show?
So it's on the NYCLA website. You can find it there.
NYCLA.org.
NYCLA.org, right? www.nycla.org. NYCLA. Did I spell that right? Okay, I think so.
Yeah.
And then I promote it on my personal LinkedIn and Twitter. I don't have Facebook. I may offend people by saying that. I don't know. NYCLA promotes
your personal brand just went up a couple of notches. They feel like, all right, that's smart.
NYCLA promotes it on its LinkedIn and Twitter. They may have a Facebook account. I'm not even sure. And then we have it on old Apple and Spotify and Google and Amazon Prime. It's sort of wherever you.
Are you on Stitcher? Do you know what Stitcher is?
I believe we are.
Okay, good. I use Stitcher. So.
Yeah, so it's all over the place. Cool. And I guess that's how the folks in London have listened to this thing.
Yeah, well, through one of the podcast platforms at the very least, right? So that's cool. And then if someone feels after listening to your episodes, and hopefully they're subscribing and mentioning a review of the episode, more positive the better. If they feel that they are an apt guest, can they reach out to you? Is there an application?
There's no formal application. My email address is when you go to the NYCLA page with the with the information. My email address is there. They can just contact me.
And once that you go to nycla.org, is it prominent? Like, where do they search for the podcast?
So on the NYCLA, there's a video and podcast tab, and you click it there, and then you'll find it.
Yeah, they got to be smart enough to navigate there in order to qualify to be on the show.
I think so. I think
that's the first vetting process. Okay, great. And you were mentioning your email address is on that page, so they can essentially pitch you for them being a guest.
And I've had people pitch me.
Yeah,
but I've had people, like I had some nice person pitch me, but what they did was they did sort of like something for children. Now, putting aside accusations that lawyers can be juvenile,
it's good that we got some lawyer jokes in, Dan.
Yeah, because, no, you should listen to the episode because I'm surprised I haven't been fired yet with the lawyer jokes that I make. So it was sort of like, okay, I'm not really relevant for you, but thanks. But people have sort of reached out. Yeah.
And in fact, obviously, the more relevant, the better.
In fact, some of the guests that we've had on and I happen to have known them, separately.
Right.
Did reach out to me and say, "Hey, I'd like to be a guest. This is what I can do." And I thought it was a great show or whatever.
Yeah. Talk about earlier. You're mentioning. People having something to sell and that it's okay and all that kind of stuff. Look, it's great when you have something to sell, but more importantly, it's positioned to why that person wants to buy, right? So from that aspect, it shouldn't feel like a sales pitch of them getting on your show. They're talking about the relevancy to your audience, which are predominantly attorneys, most of whom probably are associated with NYCLA. So as we wrap up, last question. Are there any other podcasts or video shows that you're a big fan of that you listen and watch and you want to shine a host that you know well.
Elise Holtzman, The Lawyer's Edge.
Okay, Elise Holtzman of The Lawyer's Edge. What's awesome about her show? And
what's awesome about her show is she provides great advice for lawyers to advance their careers.
Okay, cool.
To build business, to make, and all that sort of stuff. It's great.
And how has it benefited you? Have you felt like personally benefited from listening to her show?
I was a guest. I was a guest on one.
Look, there you go. So that's an easy one. Any other lessons that you got from Elise's show? You're like, that's a little of a gotcha question. Can you think of anything?
I think she runs a wonderful conversational show.
Yeah.
And it's fun. It's fun to listen to. It's informative. I highly recommend it.
Okay. Well, that's cool. I'll tell Elise. I'll reach out to her and tell her that you gave a good shout out on our show. So Dan, this was phenomenal. Thanks for taking the time of sharing Why We Podcast. Again, for those listening and watching, you can catch us everywhere. Very similar to Dan's show. You can catch us on all the major podcast platforms, as well as on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. And finally, the purpose behind it, of why we do this podcast, why I do this podcast, is threefold. I really do want to shine the light on guests like Dan to learn how and why they are benefiting others through their podcast. I believe as podcasters, live streamers, and video show hosts, we can learn from others and really have Dan as a role model in that sense of learning how he has grown through it, and others have benefited from it. I want you as an audience to kind of consider how you can improve your own show with the lessons that Dan and my other guests will be able to share. And if you've been thinking about starting a podcast or starting a video show or a live stream, reach out to me. I'd love for you to be part of our future events. About once a month, we host a show host networking event where you can introduce yourself to dozens. Right now, January 27th, we have over 70 show hosts registered, and you can see how you can be interviewed on other podcasts and live streams. Again, my name is Vik Rajan. I'm the co-founder of Video Socials and the host of Why We Podcast. See you next time.